Hi guys, welcome back to my Burstcoin mining farm. My name is Kira, and today I'd like to talk about plotting hard drives. If you're a Burstcoin miner, you'll need plot files to use during the mining process. These plot files provide possible solutions that can be used to provide proof of work consensus without GPUs. The more space you allocate to plot files, the more possible solutions you can use during the mining process, and this increases the amount that you'll earn from burst mining. Whether you have a small amount of space available or a large amount of space available, you can participate in the Burstcoin network. There's a few things you'll need to plot hard drives. One, obviously, is a hard drive. The other thing you'll need is either a reasonably good CPU or a reasonably good GPU. Plotting files requires a lot of computations, so you'll need a reasonably good GPU or CPU to plot your hard drives. For the hardware that I'll be using today, I have a GTX 960, and I also have a Ryzen 1700, and these are both good enough to plot hard drives. The hard drives that I'll be using today are a Western Digital Black 5TB. It's a couple generations old, but it still works good. This is a high performance drive, but it's still a platter, so you're not going to see crazy SSD write speeds or read speeds from it. The other hard drive that I'll be using today is a Seagate Expansion 8TB SMR. SMR hard drives, while cheap and good and they work great for mining, they plot really slowly, especially if you're plotting directly from your GPU or your CPU unit directly to the hard drive. And this is because their write speed for random data isn't good at all. So I would only recommend SMR hard drives if you're really patient or you have a drive that you can use to buffer the data between the computing unit and the disk. This video assumes you guys have a Burst wallet already. Starting from your logged in Burst wallet, you're going to go to your address here in the upper left. You're going to click it, and then you're going to choose Copy Numeric Account ID. This is a special version of your account ID that the plotter needs to identify who you are. And then you're going to go to Tools, and you're going to go to Plotter. And this plotting software is called XPlotter. And I recommend using this plotting software if you're going to be CPU plotting. So you've got your basic settings here, okay, where you want to store your plot file. This is where you're going to be using all of your hard drive space. So let's go ahead and make a new one here. I'm going to pick my Western Digital Black 5TB. And XPlotter does not want me to put this directly in the drive root path for some reason. So I'm going to go ahead and make a directory real quick. The next thing you have to do is you're going to put your account number here, and we'll paste it. So this was the number that we copied from over here. After that, you can choose the size of your plot file. If you're going to be using this hard drive to do different things on, you might want to leave some extra space. Because I'm just demonstrating today, I'm not going to use all of this. By checking this box, it'll make it so that it remembers your plot file location. So this is kind of handy. And now we've got our advanced settings. Let's skip these for now, and we're going to let it use basically all of the CPU. The Ryzen 1700 has 16 cores, so we'll let it use 15 of those cores, and we'll let it use a chunk of the memory. And we're just going to click Start Plotting, and it's going to tell us that XPlotter is not installed yet. So if you're running your plotter for the first time, you have to install the XPlotter software, and QBundle will manage the installation. So we're just going to click Yes. And now we have our XPlotter, and it's generating our hashes, and it's writing them to the disk. XPlotter will buffer these hashes in the memory that you gave it, and this allows it to generate optimized plot files. Optimized plot files are kind of important because they allow you to read the hashes faster during the mining process, and it does it a lot more efficiently. So the Ryzen 1700 can generate about this number of nonces a minute, so 17,000 a minute. That's a pretty good number. You'll see that the plotter spends more time writing the hashes to the disk than it does generating them. So the hard drive is trying to catch up with the speed that it was generating the hashes. And this is pretty common during the plotting process. You'll see that either your hard drive can't write fast enough, or your generation device, whether it's your CPU or your GPU, can't generate the plots fast enough for the writing mechanism. It's easy to forget just how big these nonces are. Every single nonce is 1/4 of a megabyte. So if we're generating 17,000 nonces a minute, you can divide that out to 4. So that's like 4,000 megabytes a minute that it has to write. So it's quite a bit of data. So we've generated our plot files, and it took about, I don't know, 8 to 10 minutes. We'll see that it put a file here and it has some special numbers in it. And the first number in this file is your numeric account number. The second number in this file is your starting nonce. And the other two numbers here tell it how many nonces it's going to write and what the stagger of those nonces are. So looking at this number, you really just need to know where the starting nonce is, which is this first one after your numeric account number. And the second number tells the program how many nonces are in this file. In this case, it's 64,888. For most users, the stagger is irrelevant, so I'm not going to cover it in this video. So let's say at a later time, or maybe immediately after you plotted your first file, you wanted to plot more. And when you're plotting more, you have to be very careful that your numbers are correct. The first number you want correct is your numeric account number. This number is used to uniquely identify all of your plot files as something that's owned by you. And if this number is ever wrong, you won't be getting credit for your mining, or there could be other issues, and you just want to avoid that. The other thing that's really important is you never want overlapping nonces. And so you remember that our starting nonce on our first plot file was 0, and we did 6,890 nonces in that file. And I'm not actually sure why that number changed, because it was 888 on the previous window. But anyways, this is fine. This is a good number. And the most important thing is that when you generate nonces, they don't have to be sequential. You don't have to have a plot file that does 0 to 10, and your next plot file has to be 10 to 20. It's extremely, extremely important that you never do nonces where you've got the numbers overlapping. So if our file is 0 to 648.90, we do not want to create a file that has the nonce in it for 64,800, because the 64,800 nonce is already located in this plot file. When you add your account number and your nonce together and you put it into the hash generator that Burst uses, they'll generate the exact same nonce. So you're wasting your space if you have overlapping nonces. So it's really important that your starting nonce equals your highest start nonce from a previous file plus the number of nonces in that file. So in this case, my last one was 0, and it went up to 648.90. And so that means that our start nonce here should be this 648.90, because that's where it's going to begin. So if you're using XPlotter here, what you can do is if you just re-put in your numeric account number, it'll, for whatever reason, it'll check these file names and it'll suggest a starting nonce for you. And this is why I mentioned it's important for XPlotter to understand where all of your plot files are, because it's very intelligent and it can find you your perfect starting nonce for your next file. So now that we've got a starting nonce that makes sense, and we've got our numeric account number in there, we can click Start Plotting, and it'll plot our new plot file. It has added the plot file to its known plot files, and this makes it so that if we were to plot another file with XPlotter, so let's go ahead and use our trick again. So we'll take off the 8, put the 8 back in there. It is suggesting a starting nonce that makes sense. And it's easy to look at these and try to visually confirm which your starting nonce is, but if you can use XPlotter to suggest your next possible nonce, I highly recommend it. The other cool thing about XPlotter is you can resume your plotting. So let's say you need to turn your computer off at night or something like that. You can just close it out. Let's say you want to resume. We'll just go into our plotter, and it'll look at your settings down here if you want to restrict its CPU usage or its memory usage. But anyway, you'll go to Action, Resume Plotting. You will browse to the plot file you want to resume and click Open, and it'll pick up from where it left off. The other thing that you can use this for, if you make a mistake or something like that, maybe you forgot which file you were last plotting, you can go into Plotter, Action, Resume Plotting, and choose the file that you don't know if it was completed or not. And what it will do is it won't do anything if it's already completed. It'll just close the window. But it's a helpful way if you want to verify that you completed plotting a particular file. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel this plotting that we've got here. So we'll just close it out here. And we don't want it to remember the plot file that we are making. So we'll remove the plot file. Remove. And removing the plot file from here just makes the XPlotter forget about it. To actually remove it, you're going to have to go onto your hard drive and delete it from there. There's another way to plot files that I really like, and it's called TurboPlotter. TurboPlotter is a relatively new software released by the community member Blackpond, and it is a great GPU plotter, and it has some really cool features on it that make GPU plotting a breeze. To get TurboPlotter, which is free, you go blackpond.com/TP, and you get this nice page, and it looks really snazzy. And so we'll get our TurboPlotter from here. We'll just download. And now here's our TurboPlotter. I'm going to open up TurboPlotter, and we're going to run this anyway. So this is the part about TurboPlotter that I really like, and it's really easy to use. So it's going to ask you this question: do you have existing plots? Why, yes, we have existing plots. We just made them. Plot file that we picked is imported simply so that TurboPlotter knows the starting nonce to use for plotting. This is really important because, like I mentioned before, you don't want overlapping nonces. And so when you open up TurboPlotter and you pick your existing plot file, choose the one with the highest nonce in it. So select target paths for plot files and optionally SSDs for fast staging. So we're going to use our GPU. You know, this is the first time I've seen this. I'm going to click yes. So I picked my GPU, and I'm not going to stage this. So I'm not going to put anything here for SSD path. And we're just going to go target disk path, and we'll select our Western Digital Black. It'll automatically choose the file size to use and the RAM to use. You can adjust the max file size and nonces, but that's not necessary. TurboPlotter will attempt to fill the entire disk that you selected, so just keep that in mind. Most miners, they just want to fill their disks because they're buying disks specifically for burst mining. If you are just using extra space on your hard drives, you might have to finagle this a little bit. So we're going to click Start Plotting. So TurboPlotter is going to use the GPU to generate nonces, and it's going to put those nonces in the memory that you've given to TurboPlotter. And once the memory bar reaches the top here, the writing will kick in and the memory will get dumped, and it will write it to your hard drive. And while the memory is getting dumped and written to your hard drive, the GPU will be tasked with generating the next set of nonces. And TurboPlotter will use half of your available memory for the cache for the GPU, and it will use the other half of your memory for the write cache, and those are going to be the nonces that are waiting to be written to the hard drive. So you can see that the memory scooted over from this side and went over to here. And now write is going to take that and it's going to pull it out of memory and write it to the disk. My GTX 960 is not a super powerful video card, so you can see it's actually not doing as well as my CPU, but that's okay. If you've got a more powerful GPU than the 960, I would definitely recommend trying TurboPlotter. But if you've got a good CPU like the Ryzen 1700, then you might consider CPU plotting instead. See how the GPU is basically working full time on this, and the hard drive is not working barely at all. It doesn't really take a lot of time for the hard drive to write the 4.3 gigabytes generated by the 960. So our bottleneck here is the GTX 960. And it's important to understand where your bottlenecks are because it will help you improve your efficiency when you're plotting your files. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this. So I'll just click X here. Opening TurboPlotter again, I'm going to make sure that our starting nonce is chosen from a file. So here we go. This time, however, I'm going to write to my Seagate. And while we're at it, I'm going to go ahead and try CPU. And I also just found a new setting on TurboPlotter that is totally brand new. And I'm going to tell it to only fill 15 gigabytes of the hard drive. So I'm going to click Start Plotting. And it looks like the CPU function works really speedy. This is faster than XPlotter actually. So look at the speed that we're writing to our Seagate drive. And we're gonna see right now it's doing okay. It's a little jumpy. But what's happening right now is because this is an SMR drive, the data is being written to a volatile cache on the Seagate drive. And once that cache is full, the write speed will drop down significantly. And so I'm going to let this go for a little bit so we can see that drop in the speed. So while we're waiting for the cache to fill up on the Seagate, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Seagate hard drive itself. So moving Froggy here, the light on the Seagate doesn't blink always when the drive is writing to its platters. It'll blink when the computer is communicating with the hard drive, but not necessarily when the drive is writing. And that's because the hard drive is storing the data that needs to be written to the disk or the operations that it needs to perform. And that data coming in is going into a cache on the disk. And after the computer takes a break writing data or the hard drive has no other choice, it's going to try to empty that volatile memory onto the disk platters. And sometimes emptying that memory is very slow. And the reason for this is because the SMR drive technology is overlapping really closely the data on the hard drives. In fact, when it's so close and you're writing data to one track on the disk, it's actually corrupting the data on the tracks next to it. And so this is that shingle technology. You've got overlapping tracks where the head has to talk with all that data, but it's just writing one little strip of it, and it's going to have to go back and fix that other data there. So that's how the SMRs give you cheap but very dense data on their hard drives. But it does slow down if your cache fills up, and you have to wait for that cache to empty so you can put more data onto the disk. So with that said about the Seagates, I should also talk about PMR drives. The Western Digital Black I have here is a PMR hard drive. And this is just perpendicular technology. It doesn't shingle the data, and so the data lanes are a little bit wider. PMR hard drives are not subject to the same constraints that you're going to find with the SMR hard drives, and they get better sustained random write operation speeds. They're a good choice if you have the money. They're typically a little bit more expensive than the SMR drives. The Western Digital Black series in particular is probably close to double the cost per terabyte than the Seagate SMR drives. So if you look at the graph right now, you can see that this hump right here is decreasing, and we're actually starting to see a decrease in speed. This is after about 40 gigabytes. I had to restart the plot because I didn't have a large enough plot to show you guys a good example. What we're seeing here is that it's actually taking longer to write the same amount of data. And as we progress, we're going to see this slow down more and more. See this gap here? It was much wider over here, and it was much wider before. So I'm going to give it a little bit more, and I'll show you how slow this drive can really become when you're writing this sort of data to it. So here's the good example. You can see that the buffer for writing to the Seagate still has stuff in it, and we're still generating computes, and this is actually almost done. But look at this write speed. It's only 3.6 megabytes a second. And so when you see this on an SMR drive, it means that the on-drive buffer is full, and it has to empty its buffer. And I think this is the fastest it can empty that buffer when it's dealing with its shingle track rewriting. So, and this is pretty typical to see on SMRs when you're doing random writes and your cache is full. When TurboPlotter has a full compute buffer and the write buffer isn't complete yet, the compute turns off. So you can see that your bottleneck is the write speed of your hard drive whenever the compute graph drops to 0. I'm going to go ahead and cancel the plotting to the SMR drive. There's ways around this problem. You can try plotting multiple drives at once using the CPU plotter, or you can use an intermediary disk. And the intermediary disk method is what I'm going to show you now. And I'm going to try to let you guys hear through my microphone that the hard drive is still writing. See, it's still going. So now I'm going to show you guys how to use an intermediary drive to get the best performance out of your SMRs. When you're doing regular plotting, you're actually doing a whole bunch of random writes to the disk. An SMR doesn't handle random writes very well. To get around that, you can increase the size of your writes so that you're writing mostly sequential data to your SMR. And this drastically improves the performance of your SMR. This time we're going to use SSD path. And I'm going to pick my C drive. You can use a PMR hard drive as well for this. It just won't perform as well. And it'll auto pick the amount of space to utilize for the plotting. I'm going to pick the starting nonce for my file. And this file can be on any one of the drives. It doesn't have to be in the same folder as where we're going to be writing. And so now we've imported our starting nonce. And we're going to choose our target disk path. And this will be our SMR drive. With all that configured, I'm going to go ahead and click Start Plotting. And you'll notice this view is a little different. Instead of our memory bars, we have a compute, a write, and now the new one, move. So compute will generate our nonces, and those nonces will be written to our SSD, in this case the C drive. And once we've generated a sufficiently large file, that entire file will be sequentially written to our SMR drive in our third step. And this will improve the SMR write speed because instead of writing all over the place, it's going to write blocks one after another. And this makes it so the SMR doesn't have to struggle with remembering all the bits of data that it's destroying in the process of writing to its tracks. You'll notice it's creating this plotting file. This file size is half of the space that we've allowed TurboPlot to use for its buffer. And this is the proper number of nonces to fill that buffer file. So what that's going to do is it's going to generate this optimized plot file, but it will only be 17.8 gigabytes. That means that TurboPlotter will create a bunch of files that are 17.8 gigabytes, and then when those files are completed, it's going to move them to the Seagate. This is the space in between finishing the buffer file on the SSD, and now it's starting on a new buffer file. So if we go over here, we can see that this is the one it completed, and this is the one it's working on now. And it's moving the complete one to the SSD. And the SSD can sustain a pretty good write speed because it's sequential. This movement here shouldn't significantly impact the ability for the CPU to create more plot files. You can definitely see the write speed is a little bit slower, but as long as it doesn't impact the compute time, I think we're okay. The most important thing here is time, right? So as long as your CPU is working as fast as it possibly can, and it doesn't have a lot of downtime, you're getting the best performance out of your system. If your CPU has a lot of downtime, that's when you've got a concern. So we do have a little bit of a downtime here, but overall this is a lot better than before. We could do away with this if we had striped SSDs or a faster SSD or striped PMR drives. But overall this is pretty satisfactory. The amount of time to write our SSD is still pretty good. This is 26 hours. Writing an SMR drive in a single day is pretty stinking good. In the past, it would take me about 10 to 12 days to write 4 SMR drives. I was doing them in parallel. And so to get that average of 3 days down to 1 day is super awesome. So before I close out this video, I'm going to give you guys a couple more tips. And they're mostly just reminders. It's really easy to make a mistake moving your numeric account ID all around. And when you make your plot files, the numeric account ID used on the plot files, it's the first number in the plot files. It must absolutely match your Burst Wallet numeric account number. So double check that number a whole bunch. Memorize that number. Make sure that when you're making a plot file, you have access to the wallet that will receive the funds if your plot files find a winning block. There is no quick way to replot your files. You're going to have to do it the long way no matter what you do. So make sure that when you do generate your plot files, they've got the correct numbers. So check your numeric account ID and your starting nonce and make sure that the numeric account ID is exactly what's on your Burst wallet, and make sure that your starting nonce is not going to overlap with any of your existing plot files. So I made this video regarding plotting on Windows-based machines, but you can also plot on Linux distributions as well. I haven't personally done that, and for me, I prefer to plot on Windows and then move the drives to a Debian system just because TurboPlotter is so great. But in the future, I'll make another video talking about Debian plotting. Anyways, that's it for this video. It turned out a little bit longer than I expected, but I hope you guys found it educational and informative, and maybe you guys will have good luck plotting your hard drives. You don't have to buy hard drives to get into burst mining. If you've got extra space on your current hard drive, then just go ahead and plot it up, and maybe you'll earn a little bit of burst coin. Make sure that you're mining on a pool. As always, if you have any questions for me or comments, or you think I'm doing things completely wrong or whatever, let me know in the comments. And also you can join me on the Burst Discord. I'll leave links in the description as always. If you'd like to use Blackpond's TurboPlotter software, I'll leave a link in the description as well. This software is free, but if you'd like to get extra features out of it, there is the Pro version, and I own the Pro version, and I do recommend it if you've got multiple GPUs, or you're plotting multiple hard drives, or you're doing multiple things at once. Definitely recommend it. If you like this video, please hit the like button on the video and consider subscribing to my channel. If you'd like to support my videos regarding Burst and cryptocurrency and hardware and all those cool things, also consider checking out my Patreon. I really appreciate it. And with that, I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you next time.